I figured it out. I found the answer to every online D&D debate we've been having since the beginning, which was 10 years ago, when the internet was invented. That's just a fact, and you can Google that. See, it all comes down to what kind of a DM you are, and I have figured out that there is truly a line. There are two kinds of DMs in this world. Oh shit, a scene change. And depending on which one you are is going to help in understanding why it is you fall on either side of these debates. Milestone versus XP. Railroading versus sandbox. I honestly believe all of these debates come from one of 2 point of views. All the ones had in good faith anyway. What's up? I'm Slone running, and today I'm wearing a beanie because the mullet is getting weird. I'm not gonna lie to you. Anyway, let me take you back to my origins, right? I've been playing this game for around 10 years, and like a lot of other people, I learned most of everything I needed to know online, here actually on YouTube. See, a funny thing happens when you want to play D&D and no one you know already plays D&D, you wind up being the arbiter. And the arbiter usually winds up having to be the DM. And I'm a nerd and like new challenges and learning things, so I didn't mind. And so immediately I jumped online. I devoured literally as much as I possibly could. And 10 years ago, there wasn't actually a whole lot. I mean, there was plenty of content, but not like there is today. See, I actually started by watching live plays. One in particular. Say it with me now. Acquisitions Incorporated. Was that not your answer? Okay, yeah, so I watched 5 or 6 AC Inc. episodes, and then, in the little sidebar of suggested content, Critical Role. Patrick Rothfuss walked so Taliesin and Jaffe could run. Never forget. Early season 1, I was on the bandwagon. And that led me to the next person I started watching, Colville. He was then, and is arguably still to this date, the GOAT of Dungeon Tubers. Never leave us. Never leave us. Back then, the list wasn't nearly as long, but his running the game playlist, taught me most of what I needed to get started. And as the years progressed, I would consistently keep up with that playlist or even go back and rewatch certain episodes, get a refresher on some of the more basic concepts. Something I still do to this day. But something strange has started to happen. Over the last 3 or 4 years, when I do that, when I go back to some of the earlier videos, I find myself not agreeing. Not thinking his strategies or advice is wrong, just coming to the realization that it's not for me. It's not the way I play. And I started to wonder. It's Colville. He's the GOAT. Am I not good at this? But I don't think that's the answer. I don't think there's any fault to me because I'm disagreeing with the way he would do things. I think we're just different. We fall into different categories. See, Colville is very open about how he fell in love with this game. It was back in the 80s or 70s. I don't know. Playing earlier editions of D&D, there was no online content to fall into, but it was also a very different style of play back then. He was also a video game designer and now a TTRPG designer. His introduction to the game was the game, and that is what resonated with him. My introduction to the game was live plays. See, I have always connected pretty deeply with movies and television and books, and then eventually live plays. And that's when I think it clicked. That's when I think I figured it out. The real difference that fuels a lot of these arguments we have online. Colville loves D&D, and I don't. I know. Dramatic inhale. It's definitely something. And it's odd because I'm here making a video about D&D on a channel focused on D&D advice. For a lot of people, and I think people like Matt Colville, not to assume his intentions, I don't know, don't get mad at me. But to a lot of people, the game is the game. The game is the purpose. And not to think that they don't enjoy the storytelling. Obviously they do, that's a massive part. But they show up with the intention of running a great game. But I love to tell stories. D&D is just the cart in which I ride to do so. What? Obviously I want to run a great game too. See, this is not a debate of which side is right. It's just a different number one priority. This sounds like postulating. I get it. But it is actually relevant. This is not categorization for categorization's sake. I think this has real implications in the way that not only we play, but the way we prep and the permissions we give ourselves to run the best game that we can. Now, obviously, the best advice ever is always going to be open communication with your players and, not being a dick. But I want to kind of dissect this, and then maybe, just maybe, a few people can look inwards and figure out why it is they're playing this game, what the reason is that has driven them here to this hobby, and then use that information going forward, maybe to point them in the direction of the kind of advice that they should listen to. Or maybe allow themselves the permissions to do some things that sometimes we're told that we shouldn't. Now, this has very broad implications if you really dig into it, but I want to give one major example. I was in a live stream the other day with a good friend of mine. Slone running on TikTok, we're live all the time, go hang out. But while talking to Only Crits, who lives across the pond and is a solid DM full of great advice, we came to a talking point that we disagreed on. Now, Only Crits kind of self-describes himself as a purist, and I feel like that may have some negative connotation, but it absolutely shouldn't. Basically, what he's saying is that he puts the rules first. And not even that all the time. It's kind of a generalization about his playstyle versus mine, but we came to a fun and interesting disagreement. We were talking about the experience for the players and what we're willing to do to forward that experience. Now, as someone who is story focused, I do something that he would never do. That I think at one point he actually called blasphemy in a good back and forth. And here's where a few people are going to strongly agree with me and say that they either already do this or that it is a cool idea. And a few people are going to tell me that I'm playing the game wrong. I will cut away from the characters. I will fully leave the characters in the world and describe or show the players something that the characters have no idea about. I stole this from television or movies. It is a common storytelling technique. And I will use this for instances like cold opens or stingers, little vignettes, little scenes either at the beginning or the end of a session. Context that the characters might not otherwise have, but I want the players to have because it's important to the story that they are telling and exploring. Or cliffhangers for the players at the end of a game to get them excited about what's coming further down the road, even if the characters have no idea it's there. Imagine the end credits scene that teases Thanos in space in a chair. None of the Avengers had seen that. They had no idea he was there. That was for the audience. I do this to build the story and the feeling. I do this to give my players that cinematic feeling. Now, obviously, this can be abused and turn into some pretty heavy railroading, and it's a thin line to ride. But I think I do it well. My players enjoy it, at least. And Only Crits has admitted that he would never do this. And to be fair to him, that's more honest to the game. We had a whole conversation about information missed. Even if it is necessary to the players understanding what's happening in the story, if the characters aren't there to see it, he doesn't show it. That gives a sense of realism to his game. That gives a sense of earned information to his game that mine will never have. And I think it's because we're two different kinds of players. Only Crits loves D&D. I love stories, and I use the game of D&D to tell them. And because of that, I honestly believe that Only Crits runs a better game of D&D. And I allow myself permissions to flesh out a story. See, once you identify your priorities and what you love about being at the table, you can then identify what you're okay with doing, even if half the internet tells you that it's not okay. Now, obviously, none of this is strictly black and white. There's going to be some gray and there's going to be some people in the middle. I get that. But try and identify why it is you come back to the table every week or every month. Try and figure out what it is you love the most about what we're doing here. Is it the game? Is it Dungeons & Dragons and the rule set in particular? Is it the gamified aspect? Or is it the storytelling that you're using these games to do? When you look back on your games, do you remember exciting moments of combat or exciting builds that you made? Or do they play out more like scenes of a movie in your head and you don't even really remember playing the game? You remember the actions of the characters. You no longer have to partake in these debates if you recognize that there's never really an answer to one. It's about what you're looking for. Once you've identified your goals and the kind of table you want to run, you can then look into things like the advice that we get online, who we listen to, what system we play in even. And you can come at making these decisions from a place of understanding yourself and your own goal. Because no, there's not a right answer in the sandbox versus railroad debate. And no, even though I think there is not a right answer when it comes to XP or milestone. And that's why these debates are never going to be solved. It may also point you in the direction of what kind of advice you should be looking at. Everyone should watch Colville's Running the Game playlist, especially new DMs. It's almost a must at this point. But once you develop your style, you might find that revisiting those isn't as helpful. You may find other content creators that align more with what you want at the table. I don't know, maybe like GM Philosopher? Maybe GM Philosopher. Maybe GM Philosopher is one of them. I don't know. Slone Running on TikTok and YouTube. The point of this video is to always tell you that there are no rules. If I had listened to all the hard stances, or even kind of the middle of the road ones, I probably would have never given myself permission to do that, to cut away from the players, but it has led to some incredible moments at the table. Always put your players and your own experience ahead of whatever hard lines are drawn in the sand, and identify whether or not you want to hold the game as sacred. Doing so is valid. It is a great way to play. But once I figured out that I didn't, it opened so many doors for me. But as always, talk to your players. Figure out what kind of game you want to run, and then be very detail-oriented about that game in your session 0. All right, let's get to work.